Well, I was going down to Colin, our framer in Bath, Meltone Frames, and I was going down Henrietta Place, which is off, Pulteney Street, and this sort of squat, short, sort of ugly sort of bloke was walking along, and I said to him, "You look like Van Morrison," and he said, "I am Van Morrison." He used to live outside Bath.
Yeah, he did.
I think it was Boxer.
I used to see him in the cafe in Milton.
Exactly. He used to come in on a Saturday morning. In fact, I saw him 2 consecutive Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
And
I used to see him in the coffee bar in Nelson Street.
Yeah.
So it was Van Morrison.
It was Van Morrison.
Van Morrison, yeah.
And you should. I said, you've got a wonderful voice, Van. And he gave me a long handshake because he took it as
a compliment.
He's an ugly, squat guy. But
he is.
I said,
he's a squat little guy.
He's got a lovely
big wide hat.
voice, and he gave me a long handshake. And then I saw him a week later, and he said, I saw you a week ago, didn't I? And he used to come up at Henrietta Place on a Saturday, and but that's what it was. I said, "You look Van Morrison." Yes, I am Van Morrison, and yeah.
Incidentally, I better correct this story because I didn't embellish it, but I did slightly get it wrong, because when I had that meeting with Greta, who said, she didn't say, "Can you give me a fuck?" She actually said, "I'm really sex-starved at the moment, you see." Mm. Yeah, she was just confiding in me. I said, "Well, I'm sorry, Greta, I can't help you out because I'm married to somebody else." That was the actual conversation.
Yeah, but you can clearly see what the intent was.
Yeah, well, she was obviously thinking maybe I would help her out, but I just said, "I can't do that."
Yeah. Well, always good to clear these things up, but
you can tartan them up a bit. Yeah.
You got to get the good stories. People don't live like this anymore, do they?
I mean, people said to me that Van Morrison is sort of not very friendly or, and stuff, and he brushes you off. But when I met him, he was really nice. Couldn't have been nicer. It was fine,
He probably saw you as a kindred spirit.
Well, hopefully, yeah. He's all right. He was perfectly... I did sort of raise about whether he collected art, but he wasn't that forthcoming on that. I was pushing it a bit, but...
I was just remembering, I did tell you that story about Derek Jacobi, didn't I?
I'm not sure you did.
Well, I painted his portrait. I painted a lot of famous
Funny enough,
people.
you look a little bit like Derek Jacobi.
I do?
A little bit, just,
Anyway.
Like a better looking version.
He was very nice, actually, because I was trying to get hold of all these different people, and sometimes I managed to do it by going to their agent. That was the way I got hold of John Simpson, actually.
Yeah.
But then, to my surprise, one day I was in the studio, I got this phone call, and the voice said, "Oh, hello, it's Derek here."
Oh, really?
I said, "What? Oh." I said, "Well, thank you very much for bringing me up." He said, "Yeah, I would quite like to have a portrait done." So I said, "Okay," and he gave me his address and stuff, and I went up to London, went to see him.
Happy days.
It was, and he, we were chatting away, and I said, the film that I really love you in is Love is the Devil.
Oh, the Bacon.
One about
Bacon.
Bacon. He played Bacon,
yeah.
and Daniel Craig played his lover.
Yeah.
In it.
Yeah.
And I said, I love that, and I love that sort of clip in it where you say, "It's champagne for my real friends and real pain for my sham friends." It's a great line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyway, we laughed about that, and I did some drawings and took photographs and things. And then I said, he said, "What are you doing after you've seen me?" And I said, "Oh, I'm meeting a friend in the West End. We're just going to have lunch." And he said, "Oh," and I said, "What are you up to?" And he said, "Oh, my boyfriend's in America filming at the moment, so I'm not doing anything." Anyway, the conversation and I just said goodbye, went off. And after I got out the door, I thought, bloody hell, I could have asked him to lunch.
Well, I think he might have had another intention, Brian.
No, I don't think so.
No?
No, it wasn't like that. It was, he wasn't after me. He was just, he was obviously not kicking his heels. He wasn't doing anything. He had no job. And his boyfriend was away. Yeah. And I think it was just a kind of, well, it would be nice to go out and have lunch with somebody or something like that, and I just forgot to ask him. Yeah. I kicked myself afterwards.
You need to brush up a bit on that, because you're a bit too polite sometimes and you hold back. You should be a bit more.
It didn't occur to me. It just
Yeah.
didn't occur to me to ask him. you know.
I mean, when you're with famous people, it puts you on your guard anyway a bit because you know they're better.
Well, you don't feel you've got the right to sort of ask.
Yeah, because they're better known than you are, and
It's
you know,
silly
so,
and whatnot. But actually, he's just a guy who's sort of lazing around, not doing anything much.
Did you paint his portrait?
I did, yeah. He didn't like it, but I
Really?
did paint it. He said he looked like an overweight Chris. Who's that big fat actor called Chris? Oh, he used to live in Salisbury, and I knew him vaguely. Chris. I can't remember his name. He became quite well known. He said I look a bit like an overweight Chris, whatever his name is. And, so he didn't like it. I had a funny mixture of experiences with that because some people were really complimentary and other people weren't. And when I did the book, I'll give it to you at some point. When I did the book, I actually sort of put all their comments in it.
Oh, really?
They said and stuff.
What book was that?
It was a book I called Meetings with Remarkable People.
Uh-huh.
And it was great fun. I did, about 4 years of meeting.
Yeah.
I met.
you did Desmond Tutu.
I did
Desmond Tutu?
Yeah, he did a lot of people.
He was lovely.
Patrick
absolutely
Moore,
lovely.
the astronomy.
Patrick Moore was
Astronomy.
crazy.
Was he mad?
What?
Was Patrick Moore eccentric?
Oh, God.
Very eccentric.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a story about him because when I went to see him, I rang him up the previous day and I said, "Oh, hello, Sir Patrick, I'm coming to see you tomorrow." And he said, "Yeah, what's this about?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to paint your portrait." He said, oh, are you all right? Yeah, okay. And then he rang off. Anyway, the following day I went down to where he was living. It was Hayling Island or somewhere like that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, South Carolina.
And I kind of rang the bell and his housekeeper came to the door and I said, a bit diffident, I said, "Is Sir Patrick expecting me?" She said, yeah, go on, he's in his study, just go on in.
Yeah.
So I went in there and he was sitting behind his desk wearing a caftan.
All right.
He didn't have anything else on, just this caftan. So he said, "Oh, hello." He said, "Collar and tie, I think." And I said, "Well, no, it doesn't matter. I'm quite happy with you."
Yeah.
He said, "No, collar and tie." And he called his housekeeper and she took his caftan off and he was completely naked behind this.
Really? not a pretty sight.
No, he was a big fat guy. Anyway, he took his, and she dressed him in a collar and tie. So he had this white shirt, he had a collar and tie, and that was it. And he didn't wear anything, didn't have any pants on or anything.
Really?
No, he was behind the desk because I couldn't see
So
him.
he was sitting behind the desk,
Sitting behind the desk with
starkless,
just in his
with a collar and tie.
So I sat there, I did some photographs, took drawings, which I always did because people are too busy to sort of sit for portraits over a long time. I did all this. And he says, "Yeah, well, stay to lunch." I said, "Oh, thank you. That'd be very nice." And we had some fish fingers, baked beans and chips for lunch.
God almighty.
That was our lunch.
Is that all?
Did his housekeeper make that?
Sorry?
Did his housekeeper make it?
Yeah, she would, she fixed everything. And all around the room were all his sort of, certificates and astronomical things. And then he said, "You can have this." And he gave me this book that his mother had illustrated and written for him, all about aliens on foreign planets.
Really?
Which she wrote and did for him when he was 9 years old.
That's very interesting.
That's what started him off with his fascination for astronomy.
Do you know her name?
I have a copy of it, yeah.
Next time I see you in Bath, I'll have a look at that.
Yeah, I have to look it out. I've got it somewhere.
Because he must have been aware about alien activity, which has been suppressed for a long time.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. And then he gave me a copy of his map of the moon,
Right.
which I've still got.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. And I said, "Well, while I'm here, Sir Patrick, could I go into your observatory?" Because it was just outside the house, and it was a big tin bin. It was huge, it was about the size of this room, but it was just like a bin, and he said, "Yes, do go in there." And he couldn't go in there because he's too fat. There's a 4 foot there's a 4 foot opening to this bin, and he couldn't go in there anymore because he was too fat. Anyway, I went in there and there was this giant telescope, in there, and I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." And I tried to get it working. I thought, I'll look at the moon or something. And I couldn't work out how to.
Maybe it was pointed at his neighbour's bedroom.
Anyway, and what used to happen then, because he was getting to the point where he was getting really sort of, and he couldn't articulate his words properly. So they used to come down with all the camera crew to the house, and he was the figurehead for the Stars at Night.
Yeah.
But he never went to London. They'd just bring all the stuff down to him.
There,
And then he'd do a sort of short introduction. All this sort of
He
nonsense.
used to spit, didn't he, a bit?
Yeah, and Anyway, they do all that, and then somebody else would take over and do introduce the program in their proper English. So there was all that. It was really hilarious. The whole thing was that, and I did a really good big portrait of him. I'm still proud of it.
Well, it was in the Bath site, the show.
Was it?
Last year?
A big one, huge one.
Last year?
The one that finished in January.
I didn't go to it. Yeah.
It was one of the best portraits I'd done, actually. I think.
Yeah, it was.
Did he buy it or did you?
No, he didn't buy it.
Buy it?
I sent them prints, these people, of the paintings when I'd done them.
Right.
John Sargent bought one. Stephanie Cole bought one.
Right.
And I sold 2 of Harry Patch. The various people.
When you paint portraits of people, do they normally buy the paintings?
Well, no. I mean, I painted about maybe a couple of dozen people, and only about 3 or 4 of them, I think, actually bought the portrait. I didn't do them as commissions, you see, because I didn't want to be tied down.
You didn't do a commission? Okay.
No,
so you approached them.
I just asked them if I could do it because I was fascinated by these people. I wanted to, because they were kind of heroes of mine in a way for various reasons.
Yeah.
So I wanted to. So I didn't want to be tied down by actually, and I didn't. Nobody asked me to do a commission. I just had to ask them. And the only way I could get in touch with them was by actually. I realised I was phoning their agents and saying, "Would you ask them if they could do it?" And on one occasion there was this thing where I tried to get hold of John Simpson, very difficult, and he came to Bath to do a book launch, as it happened, and he knew that he'd known that I was going to ask about this, and he was in the sort of ante-room getting ready to make this kind of talk, and I thought, bloody hell, if he does the talk, I'll never get to. So I walked over and went into this ante-room, and the man in there said, "Hey, you can't come," all this sort of stuff, and I said, "No, I just want to work with John very quickly." And I just said, "John, I've actually been in touch with your agent," and he said, "Yes, I know all about that. We'll get onto it. We'll do it."
Oh, good, yeah.
Also, so he's really friendly.
Direct approach, yeah. He's very tall, actually.
Well, he's quite tall. He's very big. He's very tough looking.
Yeah.
Actually, another story about him apparently was when he was in, where he was, Libya or somewhere. He was talking to this Arab guy, and he said, "Who's that guy over there? He looks rather imposing." He said, "Oh, that's Osama bin Laden."
Really?
Yeah, and this guy said, "Actually, he's asked me to kill you, but he hasn't paying me enough." So I said, "No."
Osama bin Laden.
Osama bin Laden asked this Arab guy to kill John Simpson.
Oh, to kill John Simpson?
Yeah,
he was a political commentator.
Sort of reporter, British reporter.
Really?
And he said he wanted me to kill you, but he hasn't paying me enough, so I've decided not to.
Well, do you think that's true?
Well, that's what John told me.
It's a good story.
It's quite interesting.
Probably a bit of a joke, really. But
I don't know. He got wounded. He was actually friendly fire. He got sort of really quite serious.
Oh, John Simpson,
yeah. I think he's got beyond the point where he's actually doing anything sensible now, because he keeps wanting to be in the limelight in these news things he does, and he has a program of his own.
I know.
But actually, he's got to the point where he really should stop. He should give it up.
So who were the other people you painted?
I painted. Let me see. Well, Stephanie Cole, John Sargent, John Simpson, Desmond Tutu. That was absolutely wonderful. I went down. He was in Salisbury in Wiltshire doing at the art centre, and I went down with my son actually, because he said, "Oh, I'll come along and do a little video, you see, of this." And I said, "Oh, okay." And so I went down there, and he'd finished doing a great sort of talk in the Civic Hall, masses of people. And I thought, oh, again, what am I going to do? So I waited until he came out of the stage door, and I said,
Mr. Tutu, was it?
Archbishop Tutu, "I've got an appointment to see you this afternoon." He said, "Oh yeah, well, okay." He said, "They're always giving me things to do, sort of thing." And so he was very friendly, but he said, "Yeah, I know." So he said, "Come round, this afternoon at about 2:00 to the cathedral where he was, So I went round there with my son, and he was surrounded by sort of television cameras and the Bishop of Salisbury, and and there was a kind of black choristers who came in a troop of them, and they were singing a lovely sort of song, and Desmond Tutu was sort of jigging around to the
Oh, was
music.
he?
It's great. He was standing there going like this.
Doing the tutu dance.
And then the Bishop of Salisbury came up, put his arm round him, and all this, and I thought, oh bloody hell, I'm here, and I'm never going to get this. It won't work, And then, of course, he actually just turned around and he said, Brian. He said, yeah, we'll meet up. I've just got to go into the cathedral, and then we'll go and come over to where I'm staying in the cathedral close, and I'll be over in about half an hour. And sure enough, he turned up.
You went to where you were staying?
Yeah, I went into
and did
the
you
garden
paint him
where
on the
he was.
spot?
Pardon?
Did you paint him then?
No, I didn't. Again, it was sort of photographs and drawings.
Right.
Anyway, I went into the garden there, and he came over, and he sat. He said, "Yeah, fine, that's it. Okay." And he sat down on a chair, and I started taking photographs of him, and sat there with my tripod and this, that, and the other. And I said, "Can you take your glasses off? You have all these dark glasses."
Yeah.
He said, "Oh no.
Really?
I never take my glasses off." So he wouldn't do that. But he was really friendly and sweet and stuff. So it was amazing that he actually just turned round and said hello. He remembered.
So you painted from photographs?
Yeah, I photographed
And drawings.
photographs.
And drawings.
Yeah.
And did he ever see the painting?
Well, that was another story actually, because I went to I took Edward Lewis actually. I went to St Paul's Cathedral, and Edward was really keen on this side because I was going to take these. I did about 12 paintings of Desmond Tutu because I was so excited about it. Yeah. And so I took all these paintings to St Paul's Cathedral for a charity event, and he was going to be there. I thought, oh great, this is the opportunity. I've got to at least show him what I'm doing. And he was with Terry Waite, and I did portrait of Terry Waite as well.
Right, okay, yeah.
And so I went into this place where all these, again, it was lots of events, people there and all the rest of it. And Terry Waite was being really protective of Desmond Tutu, incredibly protective. And he sort of ushered him, I couldn't get hold of him. And Terry Waite was whisking him after he talked for a bit. He was whisking him out the door, so I lost him. I just lost him completely, and he didn't even get to see the paintings. I was so disappointed.
Where are the paintings now?
Most of them are in my garage or in the studio.
Did the painting have his dark glasses?
Yeah. They would. I painted with the dark glasses, and then of course after he'd gone, I went up to Terry Waite and I said, "Can I possibly paint your portrait?" And he said, "Yes, sure, it'll be fine." And so we made this arrangement, and to my amazement, he came to the studio. He drove all the way to Salisbury to see me, and when I was waiting for him outside the studio, I could see his car going by. He passed the studio, I was, like this. So I waited for him, and eventually he came round and he found me at the studio, and he came in and he said, "Yeah, I've had a very busy day and stuff," and he was incredibly tired. So anyway, he sat there and I took some photographs and did a bit of sketching, asked him a few questions. I said, "Why was it that they let you go and you were taken hostage?" And he said, "Well, they didn't have any further use for me."
Probably didn't have any food either.
Didn't have any real need to keep me there.
Was this a bath out of the studio?
Yeah, it was in that studio. I had a bath out of the studio. So there was all that, and then I did 4 small paintings of him. He was looking really tired, and did so many. He was always going off and doing events and stuff.
It was nuclear disarmament, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was all tied up.
I saw him once in a pub.
Anyway, I was just going to finish by saying that there was that, and then I sent him the prints of the paintings, and his wife wrote back and said, couldn't you have made him look a bit happier? She said. But he was actually exhausted, that's why. So it was exciting. It was the most amazing time, really. Oh, here's your friend. He's outside he's walking up and down outside.
Is he looking okay? Is he?
He's got
just
some
wandering.
That's Mick Jagger's nephew.
Yeah. Just wandering around.
He is tall, isn't he?
He's bloody tall, yeah. I think he banged his head on the cottage door.
Oh, did he? Did he?
So today, Brian, the reason you're here, Brian Elwell, is that you have a book launch and you're giving a chat about your current book at the Penwith Gallery.
Yeah.
So just briefly say what your book is about.
Many years ago I came down to Cornwall because a friend of mine was a pilot at the Land's End Aerodrome, and he offered me his cottage for 2 weeks. He was not going to be there, and I jumped at the chance and sort of came down for 2 weeks and stayed in his cottage. And I spent the entire 2 weeks just travelling around the whole area of West Penwith, making drawings and sketches of the area. You know, that's what I did. It was really exciting. I was so thrilled to be able to do that and come down here and do all that. And then I decided eventually to get this sketchbook facsimile done of the air, you know, and I made some paintings more recently. I made some paintings to go with the sketchbooks. So that was it. Yeah.
So we are going into St Ives shortly to
Yeah, we're going into St Ives.
you to give a little chat to look at the work.
Yeah, yeah.
Hopefully
sure.
people will buy the
That's it.
books.
And I'll tell people just what I've told you, only a bit more elaborated
Yes.
about the event, you know, coming down here and stuff. So it's, yeah.
Excellent. That was a good breakfast chat.
Yeah.
Good breakfast chat. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just tell you the other person I suddenly remembered I painted was John Humphreys.
Right.
He's a miserable old bugger, you know. Anyway, he said, what happened? I went to his house, you know, he took a while to open the door, and then when he opened the door, he said, "Oh, you know, I'm really tired," and so on. He said, "Anyway, come in." And he used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go and do whatever it was, the news program, you know. First, so yeah, I've just been sleeping. I went in and he said, "What do you want me to do?" And I said, "Well, if you can just sit by the window there, and would you mind turning your head this way?" He said, "I can't do that," you know, this sort of stuff. And I said, "Okay, well, whatever you feel." So I sat there and did some photographs and this and that. And he just managed to say, "Do you want a cup of tea?" And I said, "Well, thanks, John, that would be lovely." And so he gave me a cup of tea, and he was warmed up a little bit after getting over his misery of getting out of bed and stuff. And then, so I went away after it all, and I sent him a copy. I did a large painting. It was 4 foot square, quite a big one. Most of them were over life size. And I sent him a print of this painting. He wrote back and he said, "This is the best portrait of me I've ever had done. You know, I have to say that." He said, "But I'm not going to buy it because I think having a portrait of me would be the apotheosis of vanity."
I'm going to remember that one.
The apotheosis of vanity.
Next time someone paints me, I'm going to say, no.
But, you know, it's surprising that he was so complimentary because he's such a miserable old bugger anyway when I met him. I think he was just very sleepy and tired.
Good. Well, be lucky.
Pardon?
Be lucky. That's my kind of mantra. That's my autobiography coming out. So
Oh, I see.
I say that to everybody
Be lucky.
after we have a chat.
Yeah.